about what the result comes out to be during their senior year. Keep in mind that these are admission counselors that are reading the application, and it's really the things that are put on the application that gets someone accepted, so do not feel bad. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to this email. Thank you.
What a great presentation, Renisha. Thank you for explaining the difference between early action and regular decision, and how students should approach each one and other aspects of the process when applying to colleges.
Thanks to all the presenters from the gas tutoring team. Now we move on to our guest presenters from top colleges who will inform us about their respective paths to college.
We will first begin with Pranav Atimutu, who is currently a student at Duke University, to talk to us about paths to college and how to find them.
All right, hi guys, give me 1 second and I'll just share my screen really quickly. All right, can everyone see my screen? Just someone unmute and let me know.
Yes, we can.
Good stuff. All right, well, hey everyone. My name is Pranav. My presentation is sort of in a backwards order, so I'm actually going to introduce myself at the end of my presentation. I just think that's a little bit more, I think, conducive to the way I've sort of set up my point. So,
okay, now I can hear.
Okay. All right, so I'm gonna basically, today I'm gonna be talking a little bit about, just in general, talking about paths to get to college and how to find them based on my own experience. And I'll try to keep it as general as possible because I know like every person is different. So I'm gonna sort of breeze through the parts about myself and talk a little bit more just about my general takeaways, because I think that's a little bit more helpful. All right, so yeah, so before we really begin, I want to take some time to think critically about the sort of stuff that we're talking about this webinar. So the name of this presentation is like how to get into top colleges, right? So let's take a moment and deconstruct the meaning of the word top. Like, what does top mean to us? How do universities come to be considered as top? Is there one list for that? So on and so forth. So, one criteria, probably the most common one, is just like reputation, what your parents have heard of, what you've heard of, what other people in your community have heard of. And these reputations develop over time as students in our communities go to certain colleges, they have good experiences. Other times they just develop, we just sort of inherit what the societal reputation of a college is. And so when we're thinking about reputation, one thing we want to think about is, where did this reputation come from? Is it a long-standing reputation just in the context of this country? Do you know people who've had good experiences at certain colleges, or are you just sort of taking as given what top is, given what society is passing on to you? And the other one is, how well does it hold up? A lot of definitions of top colleges are antiquated, and they've been standing for hundreds of years. For instance, the Ivy League conference is like the athletic conference that includes the, I think, 8 oldest universities in this country. So that reputation has been standing for almost 200, 300 years. So when we're thinking about it, think about how long it's been there. How well does it hold up today? How has it changed over time? The dynamics of reputation are very important. Another very closely tied concept is name brands. This is probably a term you've heard of, but it's like the name recognizability of a college. So I just dropped the term Ivy League. I'm sure that's one that most of the people on this webinar have heard of. And then like if I name colleges within the Ivy League, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, y'all have probably heard about those. They have a reputation as being very academically successful. And we know that because they've ingrained ourselves psychologically in our brains as sort of archetypes of what a good college looks like, just because these are names that we hear so often. Another criteria, and this one's an important one, is rankings. So there's a lot of external sources, corporations that do rankings of top colleges. To name a few, I think Forbes does some, Wall Street Journal does one every year. US News probably has the most common one that I know of. It's very popular. They rank like all of the universities in the country and they revise that every year. And when we're thinking about rankings, because there's so many criteria to rank universities on, uh, you can rank based on alumni, you can rank based on academic rigor, you can define academic rigor in many different ways. So, like it's a very broad label. So when you're looking at rankings, there's things you got to think about, like who comes up with the criteria that are used to rank universities. Do these criteria conflict? Is one university better in one dimension and another one better in another? And then lastly, and I think this one is important and a question we don't ask ourselves often, how qualified are rankings? US News ranks top colleges, but it also ranks like top desserts, top states, I think, top countries. Like, they're like what qualifies them to rank all of these things, and where are they getting their information from? So another important thing to think about. And another way to think about top colleges is based on program. And the GATS tutors did a great job explaining this. So I'm not going to go too much into it, but like, is a college particularly good at one program, and does that make it top? And the point I'm trying to get at with all of this is that top is a very relative designation. Top is as far from absolute in the college realm as it gets. When you're picking between colleges, you're not choosing between like different items at the grocery store, say. You're not picking products that can only be evaluated on one dimension. You're choosing between experiences. And the research finds that when people think about experiences, they don't really order them ordinally. Like there's no first place, second place. Like it's not clear that one is better than the other unilaterally. There's so many different dimensions to evaluate experiences on that we just don't look at it that way. That's just how we're wired. And I think intuitively, y'all know what I mean when I say that when we choose between colleges or other life experiences, it's not as simple as buying a car or, I don't know, buying groceries. It's just two very different animals. And so there's a couple of criteria we can think about when we think of top. And I think the best one, or probably the one you've all heard of to a degree, is this idea of fit. And fit refers to some sort of intrinsic feeling that you belong. And you can gather this in many ways. A lot of people report visiting campuses and suddenly feeling a feeling of fit because they're able to get a better readout of the social atmosphere of a college than they're able to get, just by researching online. And that feeling of fit sticks with you because it's a relative feeling that's going to depend on the person, going to depend on their tastes and their preferences. And, something to note in terms of fit is that people transfer out of what we consider top schools all of the time, every single year, simply because they don't belong. And this probably seems crazy to a lot of people who are sitting at home and like, like you're still in high school. You're like, how is it that someone gets into a top 10 university and wants to transfer out? And I think this shows you sort of the gravity of fit. If you don't see yourself belonging at a college after being there for a year, chances are you're not going to want to stick around no matter how good it is. So fit really is an important criteria when we're thinking about retention. And another point, sort of tangentially related, is that, once you get to these highest tier of colleges, the kind that I'm sure most of the people on the Zoom call are reaching for, everything really becomes comparable. Keep in mind that we're in the United States, one of the most privileged countries in the world. All of our universities are near the top of the global rankings all the time. So the quality of education you're going to get anywhere here is just worlds better than almost anything else that can be found anywhere. It's just something else really important I think everyone's got to keep in mind is that, keep in mind where we're coming from, the sort of opportunities we have the access to. And, at that point, everything is good, especially at this highest tier of colleges. So, this begs the question of what does matter in these relative rankings. And, as I mentioned, fit, that intrinsic feeling of belonging is very important. There's also campus culture and lifestyle. And obviously, these are hard things to get a readout on before you actually attend a college. But that's where like campus tours, which obviously we're not doing because of COVID, but once they come back into fashion, that plus a hearty amount of research and talking to people who attend colleges are the best way that you can get a readout of these intangible factors. Another one, and this is still important, I think, is programs that are offered. So if you want to go to a college, an important thing that's going to decide whether it's a top school for you or not is, do they have what you want? Like, say I want to go to a school that's like historically considered at the top, but I am interested in a very niche field of, say, evolutionary anthropology, and it's offered at a state school, but not at the top school I have my eyes on. So in that case, the top ranking is absolutely not an absolute ranking. It's completely relative, and it's going to depend on what school offers my program, not necessarily on what other people tell me is the top school. And another thing that matters obviously is cost. Some schools are cost prohibitive because their tuition rates are astronomical. So that's another really important consideration when you're weighing different options in your college search process. So what do you need in order to get into college? And, y'all have heard this stuff a billion times, and, we've been over this in this presentation before. Obviously, good grades, SAT scores and ACT scores, extracurriculars that'll make you stand out on your application, well-written essays that present you as a well-rounded person, well-written recommendation letters from your teachers, and a good personality. That's an interesting point I decided to add on here, but you can ask me about that afterward if you're interested, and I can share my thoughts on that. But my point is, this is what we've heard gets you into college, and we've heard this stuff a billion times, and we've heard it again today. But my question is this really the question that we need to be asking ourselves? This question for me treats college as an end state where you spend high school gearing towards college, all towards preparing for college and applying to college. And once you get there, none of this stuff really takes you further. Your good grades in high school aren't going to determine what you do in college, nor your SAT scores literally determine nothing after you sent off your last Common App. So I think this is sort of not the most worthwhile question to be asking ourselves. If you focus on all these things in high school, you might be able to get yourself into college, but it doesn't ensure really your satisfaction in college or anything beyond that. So I'm going to suggest that we consider a different question, which is what do you need in order to be successful in college? And I'm going to try to convince you all that this is really a more worthwhile question to be asking ourselves than just what do you need in order to get into college? Because frankly, the process of education and the process of being a learner doesn't stop at college. So we always got to be thinking a level higher than just getting in somewhere and think more about what will make us successful as a student and a lifelong learner, and where will we be most successful, and how do we determine rankings based on that?
Hello friends, welcome and welcome back to our channel.
So I've got a face on the screen right now. If anyone recognizes him, I think this is an interesting exercise. Raise your hand in the Zoom or throw up some reactions because I'm really curious if people have heard of this guy. Not a super well-known figure, but his name is William Derezovich. He is a former professor of English at Yale University, which you probably heard of. And he's the author of a book titled Excellent Sheep and an essay that came out a couple of years ago called The Disadvantages of an Elite Education. Both of them attracted a lot of wildfire in the academic communities. So I'd highly recommend looking up both of these. And if you're in the college search process, I'd highly recommend getting yourself a copy of Excellent Sheep because I think you'll find it very useful as a resource. And so he makes a bunch of arguments in that book. So keep in mind that Derezovich, up until he left Yale, has spent most of his life teaching students that came from the upper echelons of high school, the cream of the crop, so to speak. And what he noticed was that the system that takes people from high school to college, it pushes people to be smart and talented and driven to get good grades, but it creates students in his classes who are anxious, timid, and lost with no intellectual curiosity and a very unclear sense of purpose. This is what he noticed. And another observation he makes in the book, based on what he saw at Yale, is that once students, once they achieve the feats that get them into top colleges like Yale, they get there and they have really toxic levels of fear, anxiety, and depression. And given that we're in the middle of a mental health epidemic, particularly among students in this country, this is a very, I think, shocking phenomenon. A lot of us, especially parents, I think that the college search process ends the minute you get into a top college. But let me ask you the question of what is it really worth if you get to that college and you're unable to maintain your ability to learn in a healthy way? You're falling into pitfalls of anxiety and depression. At that point, what is it worth where you get into? And in the same sense, what is it worth getting into a top college if you aren't equipped with the resources to do well and to pursue your passions once you get there? And I think the most important point that he points out is that, the way that these students get to this point of anxiety and depression and the way they lose that intellectual curiosity is the endless hoop jumping that our communities have been pushing them into for years. For the past, I think, 10 years or so, many communities, especially the Indian community, has treated college as this sort of absolute thing where there's these top colleges and you have to grind yourself to death in high school to get into them. And what this does is it creates students that get into the colleges, but then by the time they get there, the way they prioritize learning is primarily in terms of things like grades, and they're not able to achieve the level of intellectual curiosity and exploration that makes you successful in college. Getting good grades may make you successful in high school, but the argument Derezvich makes is that in a place like the university, where the goal is to interact with people, build social skills, and explore frontiers that you otherwise never would have access to, what matters is curiosity. And frankly, the argument he makes is that curiosity gets beat out of you if you keep yourself as busy as you keep yourself in this sort of formulaic approach to college admissions. So I want you all to keep that in mind as we move forward, because I want to think a little bit about what does this mean for us as people who are in the college search process. Well, for one, I think it suggests to me that it's not enough to think of high school as just a device that gets you into college. High school is a part of your life, and so you have to treat it as something that's meant to be a learning experience in and of itself. And by the same logic, you can't think of college as something that's only meant to take you to your first job, or your first job is something that's meant to give you the resume credentials to get to your second, because this is a process that iteratively continues ad infinitum. It means that if you're at a given level, if you're at college, you're always thinking about what's coming next, and you're not taking advantage of the full resources present in a particular level. I see a couple things in the chat. Let me just make sure none of that's from me. Okay. All right, I'll keep going. Sorry. But yeah, so my point is, like, if you think of high school always as a stepping stone to get to college, then every part of your life is going to become a stepping stone. And this is the easiest way to make waste of college and the tuition dollars that you put into college. If you want sort of a more utilitarian, money-based way of looking at it, college is a huge investment, both in terms of money and emotions. And you want to make sure that you're able to put the most into it and get the most out of it. So again, just reiterating, high school is a part of your life. And in the same way, college is also a part of your life. So as much as we want to get into these good places, we want to make sure we set ourselves up for success and proper mental health once we get into college. And so that's why these extra considerations are important. And that's why I'm suggesting to you that it's not enough to just get into college, but to use high school as a way to prepare for college, to make yourself successful there so that you make the most of your 4 years. And my main sort of, if I had to sum this whole presentation up into one sentence, I would say to everyone on this call right now, spend high school learning the skills needed to find, develop, and pursue your purpose. I've been at Duke for a year now, and I can say that this message is the skills needed to find, develop, and pursue purpose are exactly what you need to succeed in college. It has nothing to do with my grades. I'm in an environment where my grades absolutely matter. And I can tell you as a student at like a quote top tier college, like it's really hard to keep my grades up, but that's not ultimately what defines success in college. If I just got good grades in my classes, it wouldn't be enough. And that's just the truth of it. You need to have extra skills that prove your intellectual curiosity and your ability to follow through on curiosities wherever and whenever they pop up. That's what makes you successful in college. Okay, so now that I've talked about all this, I think the natural next question is, how does this relate to the first question we asked? If you do prepare yourself to succeed in college and high school, does it give you sort of the same benefits as only preparing yourself in high school to get into college? Like, do you still reap the benefits of good admissions, getting into all the top places? And so my argument that I'm going to make is if you work to develop the tools to find and really pursue your genuine interests, you can expect the following as side effects: better mental health in high school and college. And this, I think, just goes back to the point that Derezvich made. If you prepare students to only pursue things in terms of admissions and numbers and not in terms of what they're actually curious about, by the time they get to an environment where they need curiosity, the lack of curiosity is going to drive them into the depths of depression and anxiety and other mental health issues that colleges are overwhelmed trying to handle. So if you work towards actually pursuing a genuine interest in high school, you can expect yourself to have better mental health once you get into college. And another important point, sort of along the same lines, is that you're going to have a better chance of being satisfied wherever you end up. So even if you don't end up at your top choice, if you've chosen a college that has your program and you're driven to pursue what you're interested in, regardless of where you end up, there's a higher likelihood you'll be satisfied in college than if you just sort of go and do admissions by the book. It'll also mean that you'll have a chance to write better essays because you'll have better topics to write your essays on. Someone, I think, mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but like your essays will come out much better if you can talk about things you're actually curious about. Like if you spend your entire high school experience doing things that other people are saying, it's going to be a lot harder to write an essay that really captures your voice. And by the same logic, I think, the better essays you write, the more you can present yourself as an intellectually curious person on your application, the more likely you are to actually impress an admissions officer and get admissions into top tier colleges. And this is another important point, right? So if you do really come into college with with the skills needed to pursue genuine interests, you're also less likely to drop out or transfer out because you're more likely to be satisfied with where you actually end up. But I also want to note, neither of these are bad things. If you're not satisfied somewhere, it totally makes sense to transfer out. Or if you have an idea that you need to pursue that you can't pursue in college, maybe you'll drop out. And so neither of these are bad things, but I think insofar as college admissions is considered, we want to get somewhere good and we want to stay there. And the best way to do that is to prepare ourselves to tackle our interests and our curiosities. You're also more likely to be satisfied with your career. And this is just by virtue of the fact that if you pursue genuine interest in college, you're more likely to end up in a job that matches your genuine interest. Hence, you're more likely to be satisfied while also earning a decent salary. And also, and I can say this as a college student, it really matters once you get to college that not only you pass your classes, but that you enjoy them and that they get you to ask like critical questions uh, outside of the class. That they spark curiosities that transcend the hour that you spend in class. This really matters, and the best way to set this up is to set yourself up to recognize your curiosities and follow through on them, and take classes that match those curiosities. You're also more likely to make genuine friendships and connections because you're likely to connect with people who share your genuine interests. So on the flip side, if you don't really know what your curiosities are, you're more likely to make superficial connections that just won't stick. And by the same logic, you can probably develop better social skills because you'll be better able to articulate your curiosities. And finally, I think as a big sort of cherry on top moment, all of these skills and being able to pursue your curiosities are going to give you the skills needed to make the most out of college, whether that's from a monetary perspective or from a time perspective. I guarantee that if you know how to tackle your interests, you're likely to make the most of the resources that your university offers once you get there. And this list is not exhaustive. It continues to infinitum, like these benefits are not exhaustive, but these are just a couple of the things that you can expect if you really think about, what benefits does being truly intellectually curious and developing that curiosity in high school get you once you get to college. So the natural next question is, what paths can you take right now to get to this level of intellectual curiosity that sets you up for college, success in college, and keeps you away from the paths that Derezovich talks about in his book. And so I think the biggest recommendation I can make, and something I learned far too late in high school, is to take classes that really interest you. Like the pre-prescribed way of going back college is to like load your schedule up with AP classes. And I can tell you, like I've had a bunch of sit downs with my college advisor, and he's told me multiple times that I was really stupid for doing that. Like I literally didn't even need like half of those high level classes to get into my college. They're not giving me credit here at Duke because Duke doesn't take high school credit. So like at that point, like a full AP schedule really didn't get me much because it kept me from truly exploring my interests. And instead, take advantage of the unique classes that are offered at your high school and take a moment to try new things. I know that my high school, for instance, had a bunch of different track programs for specialized interests where you can learn sort of subjects for which there aren't AP classes. And I avoided them just because I was sort of in that mindset of taking advanced classes without knowing what those classes would necessarily do for either my application or my well-roundedness as a person. Another important point, and this one is, I think, a controversial one, is, you don't want to burn all your time preparing for your standardized tests. A YouTube video came up in my recommended the other day, and it was about comparing like the top colleges or like admissions to top colleges in America versus India. And something that the presenter mentioned that I thought was interesting was like in India, if you get a perfect score on the JEE exams, you can expect to get into all the IITs. It's almost guaranteed because they want the kids who get the highest scores. Now, the flip side is, and I can guarantee you this, even if you get a perfect score on your SATs, you're probably not guaranteed admission into the most selective colleges in this country. In fact, I can tell you, you're not guaranteed that. And the reason why is because we're embracing this idea of holistic admissions. Admissions officers are looking for people who are more than just test scores and numbers. And so it'll behoove you to spend your time making yourself a more developed person rather than trying to boost your test score by a couple of points. And I don't mean that just in sort of an idealistic way. I mean, this will literally give you a better chance of getting into a good college. And another important point, and this sort of goes along with the stuff I was saying, the best way to develop curiosities is to engage with the world in meaningful ways, whether that means service to your community, activism, or other things, because these are, especially activism, very important in our society today where a lot of social change is happening. And we, as the young generation, are the ones that are making that change. So the best way to find your interest in a time like this is to participate, participate in your community, participate in your society, and find those broad passions that you care about by serving the community that got you to where you are. And I should also mention, only do these things if you really care about them. If you're just doing it for the application, first of all, I think that's poorly reflective of you as a person, because I think it shows that you're willing to do service in a performative sense just to sort of get you to that college endpoint, and it treats college like an endpoint, which it shouldn't. And I think the other thing it does is, it wastes your time from other things you could actually be passionate about. So if service isn't your thing, don't do it. Find where your passion is, find your niche, and pursue that rather than doing something pre-prescribed. Another important point, do research. And I mean this in two different senses. So your senior year, spend a lot of time researching colleges to see which ones have the programs that are right for you. So remember, at the very beginning of this presentation, I said top is a very relative designation. So in order to find out, what makes top, what means top for you, you have to do research. Look into majors, look into professors, also look into scholarships, because scholarships are not just a way to make money, but can also put you in programs that set you up for success in the university to which the scholarship applies. And other things that really matter once you get to college, internship programs, study away, look into all these opportunities and research things that you'd actually be interested in doing if you got admitted to a college. If you're applying to a college and you can't justify that any one of these things I've listed is of particular interest to you, then you haven't done your due diligence of research. And I also mean research in a different sense, which is like before you get to your senior year, research world issues that you're passionate about, find those curiosities early on, do what you need to reach out to universities, and you also have the internet completely at your disposal. So, go on the web, research more about the issues you care about, and contribute to their fields, contribute to them through activism, do what you can in order to make yourself truly competitive, but also to develop yourself as a person in high school. And another thing, and I think this one is most important, don't just do something just because someone else told you to, or because your parents told you to, or because it worked for them. Because the reason something works for someone in admissions is because it's something that came out of their pure, genuine curiosity. So for you to just do it because it worked for someone else just isn't going to work in college. And it's also going to be a poor use of your time. Remember, like high school is a part of your life. So you want to spend your life, your entire life, doing what you care about and doing what's meaningful to you. So don't just do something that you don't enjoy just because someone told you to, or because someone told you that it's going to get you into a college. This especially, I think, applies to parents, because I find that it's parents that often push this message onto their children. All right, and this point I think is probably the most important one I'm going to make tonight is like, don't be lazy. Because I know I was lazy in high school. High school is 4 years in your life, and your life is finite, and you're not going to get high school back. So use your time wisely, use it to pursue those curiosities. And keep in mind also that it's the only training you're going to get before college. So if you have goals you want to set out to achieve in college, prepare yourself for them ahead of time by doing the due diligence in high school. Don't just put it off for college, because high school is literally a part of your life, and you want to make it, part of a life that you're happy that you lived. So don't waste your time, use your limited time to do as much as you can. And ask yourself always, am I making the best use of my time, and how do I want to make use of my time? And at the same time, don't be crazy. And the same things apply here. High school is literally just 4 years of your life, and there's only so much you can do in 4 years. So at the same time that you're trying not to be lazy, also don't take it overboard. It's the training that you get for college. So do the things that really matter, and don't spend your time like spreading yourself too thin if it means you can't devote your time to what you really care about. And then lastly, if opportunities don't exist at your school, make them exist. My school was a place where not a lot of clubs got too much funding or didn't even exist. So if there's something I wanted to do, the path of achievement for me was to just sort of go and make it happen. And I think this reflects better on your application than just being a part of the process. Be a change maker at your high school, be a change maker in your community. Don't just go with the status quo, because frankly, that's just not impressive, and it's not a good use of your time. So having talked about that, I want to take a little bit of time at least, and I'll go through this pretty quickly because y'all can look up this information on your own. But I want to talk a little bit about my university, because I really love it. So a little bit about Duke. Again, this isn't an exhaustive info session, so I'm going to keep this very brief. Visit the website for a little bit more info. So Duke, if y'all haven't heard of Duke, is a private university located in Durham, North Carolina. We have an undergrad population of about 6,500 students. So I guess that would make us maybe a small university and maybe a medium-sized sort of college. There's 2 campuses at Duke. East Campus, which is portrayed at the bottom, home to all of our first-year students, and also West Campus, which you can see at the top. That's home to the upperclassmen and also the graduate schools and basically everything else. There's also two separate colleges, and I think this will be interesting and an important point for anyone who wants to apply to Duke. Something that really drew me into Duke is that we have two different schools that each specialize in their own thing. So Trinity College is where you would go for most non-engineering related fields. That's the natural sciences, the social sciences, the humanities. And then there's also the Pratt School of Engineering, which is our engineering school. So if you were, say, a mechanical engineering student, you would apply through Pratt. And what is Duke known for? You know, again, based on how I portrayed top, it's really on each individual person to find out, you know, what is Duke known for? What are the universities known for? But, you know, here's a short list that I know from my experience. So we have